The North remembered, and Ned Stark, who should have died long ago, was still alive, and colder than ever. They had taken his honor, locked him in a dungeon, made him kneel, and finally cut off his head. But in this story, they failed. Varys had saved him. Not for kindness, not for justice, but because the spider always played a long game. "You're worth more alive than dead, Lord Stark," he had whispered. "And the realm may yet need you." Ned never saw it as a blessing. Just a second chance to fix everything that went wrong. When he returned to Winterfell in secret, it was no longer the home he knew. Robb had already marched south. Bran couldn't walk. Rickon was confused and angry, and Jon was far away at the wall, fighting shadows beyond the snow. But soon the news came like thunder. Robb was dead. Catelyn too. The Red Wedding had shattered the North. Ned Stark fell to his knees. He wept not just for his wife and son, but for the part of himself that still believed in honor, in rules, in mercy. That part was dead now. Only one thing remained: fire and vengeance. King's Landing had taken everything from him. The Iron Throne, with its sharp edges and ugly lies, had killed his friends, destroyed his family, and bathed the realm in blood. He would not die quietly this time. He would burn it all down, and he wouldn't go alone. Jon Snow came down from the wall, colder than winter, riding ghost like a shadow. Arya returned from Braavos, silent as death, a new kind of monster wearing her father's name with pride. Sansa, now hardened and smart, walked beside them, her red hair tied back like a queen, ready for war. Bran. Well, he wasn't Bran anymore. But even the three-eyed raven could feel the storm coming. The wolves had gathered, and with them rode the North, the Vale, and all who had suffered under Lannister rule. The banners flew not for justice, not for politics, but for revenge. The riverlands burned behind them, cleared of Freys and rats. Storm's End opened its gates without a fight. Even the Iron Islands, broken and bleeding, sent ships under Asha Greyjoy's command. Daenerys had already taken Meereen. She heard of the northern movement and paused. Her eyes burned with dragonfire, but her heart whispered, "These are not enemies. These are kindred spirits." She flew to meet Ned Stark on the field near the ruins of Harrenhal. There, two legends stood. One, the girl with dragons who broke chains. The other, the man who lost everything to a crown. "I won't bend the knee," Ned said. "I won't ask you to," Daenerys replied. Their alliance was made without words. Fire and ice, rage and reason. They stood before King's Landing weeks later. The people of the city saw black sails, white wolves, and 3 dragons circling overhead. The Red Keep stood proud, but there was fear in every stone. Inside the castle, Cersei Lannister drank her wine slowly. She'd heard the rumors, laughed at first. "Ned Stark is dead," she said, but deep down, something cold slithered in her chest. The North was at her gates, and this time, they weren't here to kneel. The sky above King's Landing was no longer blue. It was thick with smoke from camps outside the walls, and the sound of war drums echoed day and night. The people, once proud of their golden city, now whispered in alleyways, too scared to sleep. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister paced like a lioness in a cage. Her hair was shorter now, cut cruelly after her walk of shame, and her eyes sharper than ever. She stood before the map of Westeros painted on the floor, staring at the North. "Tell me it's not true," she barked. Qyburn swallowed. "I've seen him with my own eyes, Your Grace. Eddard Stark lives, and he marches with Jon Snow, Arya Stark, and the Targaryen girl." She slammed her goblet so hard, the wine splashed across the painted North. "So the dead rise now?" she sneered. How poetic, but inside she was shaking. This wasn't war anymore. This was something else, a reckoning. Meanwhile, Ned Stark stood before the gates of King's Landing. The city that once held him prisoner made him watch as his men were butchered and took his daughter hostage. He remembered how his head was meant to fall here, how Sansa had begged for his life, how Joffrey had smiled. That boy was dead now, but the city still breathed. The rot still festered. "You were right, Jon," Ned said quietly, looking to his bastard son. "Mercy is for those who deserve it." Jon's face was stone. "They never showed it to us. Arya stood beside them, her eyes locked on the gate. "Let me sneak in. I'll wear a face. I can cut the Queen's throat before she even smells danger," but Ned shook his head. "Not this time. No shadows, no whispers. The world must see this." Behind them, Daenerys waited with Drogon and Rhaegal. She no longer smiled. She no longer spoke of breaking the wheel. Now she only burned to break the bones of those who'd shattered her path. She looked at Ned. "When do we begin?" He didn't answer with words. He simply raised his sword, ice, reforged from memory and hatred, and pointed it at the Red Keep. The dragons roared. The north charged. Inside the city, panic erupted. The bells rang loud and desperate, but this time no one listened. Soldiers scrambled to the walls, but they were met with arrows from the Vale and bolts of wildfire exploding from secret tunnels dug by Daenerys unsullied. Arya vanished into the smoke. Brienne of Tarth, riding beside Podrick, smashed through the southern gate like a thunderstorm. She wore no sigil, only vengeance on her face. Somewhere Jaime's ghost watched silently. Cersei stood in her tower, watching the city fall apart beneath her. Qyburn spoke behind her, but she didn't hear him anymore. Her eyes were fixed on one man, walking through fire, leading the charge, covered in ash and blood. Ned Stark. He had no crown, no armor of gold, but in that moment he looked more like a king than any Lannister ever did. The people tried to run, but the streets were filled with chaos. Jon Snow and the Northmen fought like men possessed. They didn't loot. They didn't cheer. They just killed, clean and silent, burning away the city that had stolen too many of their loved ones. Daenerys circled overhead, her dragons dropping fire on the outer walls, forcing surrender from soldiers who never believed they'd see dragons in their lifetime. And then it happened. The Sept of Baelor exploded, not from dragonfire, but from within. Arya had placed wildfire barrels in its heart, just as the Mad King once wanted. Only this time, it was justice. The flames rose, high, green and furious, lighting up the whole city. From a tower window, Cersei watched her legacy burn. All her children were dead. Her father was gone. Her grip on the realm had slipped through her fingers like sand. She stood tall. "I am the Queen," she whispered, and then the door behind her broke open. Ned Stark walked in, sword in hand, his face like ice. Cersei laughed bitterly. "Come to finish what you started, Lord Stark." "No," he said. "I've come to finish what you started." And the sword rose. The sword came down, and with it the last breath of Cersei Lannister. No trial, no long speech, no begging. She died like so many others she'd stepped over. Alone, bitter, and shocked that someone had finally dared to do it. Ice sliced through her neck, and her body crumpled at the feet of the man she once had broken. Ned Stark didn't even flinch. He turned, walked over her blood, and stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched below him, on fire, torn apart, screaming. But for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel pain. He felt nothing. Jon Snow stood in the throne room, having carved his way through gold cloaks and Lannister loyalists to get there first. The Iron Throne stood before him, still standing, still ugly. He stared at it, that twisted thing of blades and death. "I thought it would feel different," Jon whispered, when Ned entered behind him. "But it feels like ash," Ned nodded. "That's all it ever gave." Outside, Arya moved through the shadows, her blades wet, her face empty. She had killed Qyburn with a single slice. The mountain never found her. He died under a dragon's fire as Drogon lit the inner keep, turning stone to molten hell. Daenerys landed on the courtyard, her white hair whipping in the wind, her eyes glowing with something dangerous. She had not stopped burning. The city was broken, and yet the throne still stood. She entered the hall now, walking past Jon and Ned, her eyes locked on the thing she'd dreamed of since she was a girl. But something felt wrong. Ned could see it in her. That madness, that flicker. "You've won," he said carefully. "There's no one left to fight you." She looked back at him. "Then why do you sound like it's a bad thing?" He didn't answer. Jon stepped forward. The city surrendered. "We didn't need to burn so much." Daenerys' voice was calm. We did. We needed to show them what happens to tyrants. We needed to cleanse it. Arya had just entered behind them. She didn't say a word, but her eyes locked with Jon's. They understood each other. Something was wrong. Drogon stood outside, growling low, sensing tension. "You're becoming what you fought," Ned finally said. "A queen with fire and blood. Is that all you are?" Daenerys turned sharply. "And what are you, Lord Stark? You murdered a queen without trial. You let your daughter destroy the sept. You led your sons into slaughter." Ned's jaw clenched. "I never claimed to be just anymore. You're just like me," she whispered. "And if I must rule with fire, then so be it." Then she walked toward the throne. Jon reached for his sword. Ned didn't move, but Arya did. She stepped between Daenerys and the throne. Her voice was soft, almost sad. "You don't deserve this chair. Not after what you did to those people out there." Daenerys stared her down. "Move." "I'm not scared of you," Arya said. "You think burning a city makes you powerful? We've seen worse monsters than you." A pause. Then Daenerys lunged. Fire burst from her hand, a spark from a hidden flask of wildfire she'd carried for protection. But Arya was faster. Needle stabbed forward, and in one sharp move, Daenerys Targaryen collapsed beside the throne she never sat on. Jon rushed to her, caught her as she fell. Her blood spread across the stone like a final signature. She looked up at him, tears falling. "I only wanted to make it better." Then she was gone. Ned turned away. Outside, Drogon roared so loud the entire Red Keep shook. He flapped his wings and fire burst into the sky. He saw her, his mother, lifeless, and the throne, that cursed throne. He screamed, blasted it with fire until the metal ran like water. Then he flew off, carrying her body far away into the clouds. The throne was gone. Cersei was dead. Daenerys was dead. And now Westeros was leaderless, burned and broken. Ned Stark looked at his children. "What have we done?" No one answered, because no one knew if they were still heroes anymore. King's Landing had no ruler, only ruins. Days passed like smoke, drifting through shattered streets. The people, those who survived, spoke in whispers. Of dragons, of ghosts, of wolves with eyes like ice. Some said the gods had judged the city. Others said the devils had won. Ned Stark didn't speak for 2 days. He stood outside what remained of the Red Keep, watching workers pile up bodies in carts. Children, women, soldiers, burned beyond recognition. The smell made even the toughest men gag. Jon Snow stood nearby, quiet and brooding. He hadn't slept. Arya watched him like a shadow, knowing exactly what weighed on his soul. "You held her while she died," Arya finally said. "Do you regret it?" Jon didn't look at her. She believed in something, just like we all did. "Belief isn't enough," Arya said coldly. "Not when it burns children alive." In the Northmen's camp, things were getting worse. Soldiers who'd fought with fury now drank with rage. Some began to question why they were still there. "She's dead, he's dead, the whole city's ash," said one commander. "Why are we still in this goddamned graveyard?" And more troubling, some started to see Jon as the man who should lead. Not Ned, not Sansa, not any Targaryen or council. Just him, the bastard who killed the Dragon Queen and lived. Ned saw it happening, but said nothing until Sansa arrived. She came with a quiet army of northern loyalists and riders from the Vale. She walked through the ruins like a queen, calm, controlled, and sharper than ever. Her eyes scanned the mess and made judgments faster than any general. She met Ned inside the broken throne room. Only rubble remained where the Iron Throne had once stood. "You didn't burn it," she said. "No," Ned answered. "Drogon did." Maybe the beast was wiser than all of us. Sansa looked at her father carefully. "What happens now?" Ned shook his head. "The realm will want answers. Vengeance has no politics. They'll call us conquerors. They'll call us monsters," she corrected. Arya entered then, dragging behind her a prisoner, Tyrion Lannister, dusty, bloodied. "But alive!" "He tried to sneak out through the tunnels," she said simply. Tyrion's voice was dry. "Sneaking? No, Lady Stark. I was escaping the ruins of a dream." "There's a difference." Ned stared at him. Why did you stay? Tyrion smirked. Because someone needs to be alive to tell the truth. And what truth is that? That every one of you thinks you're saving the realm, while all you're doing is replacing one tyranny with another. Arya stepped forward, blade twitching. Say that again. But Tyrion didn't flinch. Your sister burned a city. Your army killed thousands. Your queen was stabbed by your brother. And your father, the great Lord Stark, came back from the dead just to swing the sword one more time. He spat blood. How long before the people fear you more than they ever feared Cersei? Silence, even Ned couldn't deny it. Sansa stepped between them, looking down at the dwarf. So what's your solution? Another king? Another war? Tyrion shrugged. No, my solution is you leave. Take your wolves, your justice, and your burned sense of honor, and go back north. Let the South rebuild without your ice in their veins. Ned considered it, but then Jon said something that turned the room cold. We can't go back. They all turned to him. Jon's voice was tired. If we leave, the vultures come back. Lords with gold, crowns, and promises. The ones who always survive. Men like Littlefinger, like the Tyrells, like the Greyjoys. The game will start again, and who do you suggest should rule? Sansa asked. Everyone went quiet. Jon didn't answer. He just walked away. Later that night, Ned sat alone in the rubble of the Great Hall, looking at old ghosts. He saw Robert's laughter, Cersei's fake smile, Joffrey's madness, and Daenerys's burning eyes. He whispered, "What have I done?" But there was no answer. Only ash falling from the broken roof. Outside the city, rumors began to spread. The Stark bastard had killed the Dragon Queen, the North had taken the South, and the throne was gone. What rose next would not be a king or queen, but something else, something colder. The Raven Tower at King's Landing, once used for royal messages, was now quiet, except for the scratching of quills and the quiet lies carried on parchment. The North has seized the capital. The bastard of Winterfell holds court like a king. Stark. Blood runs thicker than dragonfire. The letters flew across Westeros faster than ravens ever had before, spreading fear. Back in the city, Jon Snow stood in the ruins of the throne room, wearing no crown, holding no title. But the men around him, the soldiers who had marched from the wall to the gates of fire, treated him like something more than a man. And that was the problem. They look at you like you're king, Arya said, sitting on a broken column, even after what you did. Jon didn't respond. They forget too fast, she added. She burned a city, yes, but you still killed her. He clenched his jaw. It was mercy. Arya's voice turned cold. So was father's, and it nearly got him killed. Outside, Sansa had set up a temporary council, trying to rebuild what she could, grain stores, water supply, safety. But every time she spoke, the Southern lords stared at her with suspicion. Lady Stark, said Lord Tarley one morning, do you plan to rule this city with your northern customs, or are we prisoners wearing courtesy? Sansa didn't blink. If you were prisoners, Lord Tarley, you wouldn't be sitting here sipping my wine. She smiled sweetly. The other lords said nothing, but they were afraid, because no one had forgotten how easily the city had burned. And Ned Stark had vanished. After Daenerys's death, Ned had stepped away from the camp, from the leadership, from everything. He stayed near the rubble of the Sept, sometimes alone for hours, speaking to no one. He looked older, harder, colder. When Tyrion finally returned, released by Sansa under watch, he found Ned by the shattered statue of the Seven. You're winning again. I see, Tyrion said dryly. Ned didn't move. Winning? Tyrion chuckled bitterly. You took the throne. You destroyed the Lannisters. You burned the city that betrayed you. And now your children hold every corner of power. That's more than Robert Baratheon ever had. I don't want power, Ned replied. Tyrion sighed. And yet power clings to you like rot. That night, the small folk began to riot, not out of hate but out of hunger. With no queen, no food supplies, and half the city in ruins, people began dragging corpses into the streets, begging for bread. A child was caught trying to steal from a northern soldier. The soldier beat him near death. The crowd snapped. By morning, 5 northern soldiers were dead. A cart of grain was set on fire. One man hung from a post, marked with the words, "No more wolves." Jon saw the writing. "This city will never accept us," he told Sansa. Sansa nodded. "Then maybe we don't give them a choice." Jon looked at her, startled. "What does that mean?" "It means," Sansa said coldly, "that we either walk away and let the snakes take back the pit, or we turn the north into something the south can't ignore anymore." Arya stepped in, arms folded. "You're starting to sound like her." Sansa smiled without warmth. I watched her closely. "You don't have to become the dragon to learn how to fly." That same day, a messenger arrived from Riverrun. It wasn't a letter. It was a head Edmure Tully's head. Attached was a note. "The South belongs to itself. Send your wolves back to their snow, or we send more." Jon read it. Arya burned it. Ned said nothing, but Sansa? She called her commanders. "Seal the city," she ordered. "Let no one in. No one out." Arya's voice was sharp. "You're going to start another war." Sansa's face was stone. "No, I'm going to end what should have ended years ago." That night, the bells rang again, but not for surrender. They rang for something far older, judgment. The North was no longer a guest in the South. They were the storm that never left, and somewhere in the shadows of the ruined city, something darker was rising, because not everyone who burned stayed dead. Because not everyone who burned stayed dead. Winter was supposed to be behind them. But the cold hadn't left. It wasn't snow or wind this time. It was silence, the kind that crept through the ruins of King's Landing, through its alleys and sewers where whispers were sharper than blades. The city didn't rise in open rebellion. It rotted instead. Children went missing. Northern scouts were found dead, throats slit, eyes gouged. A ship exploded in the harbor. No survivors, no warning. And messages began appearing on walls, scrawled in blood or ink. "The wolves will drown in their own blood. You burned our queen. Now we burn your peace." "Vengeance sleeps beneath the stone." Ned Stark sat in the old council chamber, now half rebuilt and dimly lit as reports poured in. Sansa stood beside him, face unreadable. Arya leaned in the corner, eyes scanning everyone like she was already planning how to kill them. Jon hadn't shown up. Again. "He's slipping," Arya muttered. "He stays out in the streets at night, walking among the people, pretending he's one of them." Sansa crossed her arms. "He wants to ease their fear. But they don't want peace. They want someone to blame. And soon they'll start blaming him," Arya said. Ned was silent for a long moment. Then he stood. "We came here to end a cycle, not to sit on its ashes." Sansa stepped forward. "Then what do you propose? We leave after all we lost?" "I propose we stop acting like we're better than them," he said quietly. "We've become what we hated." Arya laughed, dark and soft. "Speak for yourself, father." "I always hated everyone." But before anyone could respond, a raven burst through the window, bleeding and broken. Its wings were clipped, its chest marked with a sigil, a red sun bleeding over a mountain. Dawn. The last of the southern kingdoms had spoken. The letter was short. "Return to the north, or we return fire," Sansa scoffed. "They won't reach us." The Dornish love to talk and bleed in deserts, but Arya's face said otherwise. "This isn't a warning. It's a promise." The next morning, 3 things happened. A Dornish ship was spotted in Blackwater Bay. A northern camp near the city walls was found emptied. Every man flayed. Skinned alive, the banner of House Bolton nailed beside them. And Jon Snow disappeared. No one knew where he went. Some thought he defected. Others whispered he went south to negotiate alone. Ned feared something worse, that he'd given up, but Arya had a different idea. "He's gone underground," she said. "Into the sewers, into the belly of this place. He's hunting something, or being hunted," Sansa said coldly. Ned slammed his hand on the table. "Enough," he growled. "This isn't who we are. I didn't come back from death to rule a corpse city while my children disappear one by one." But Sansa's eyes narrowed. "No. You came back to finish what you started. You just never said who you were finishing it for." He stared at her. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying," she said slowly, "the South will never kneel to us. Not out of fear, Not out of respect, only out of necessity. Arya's lips curved. You're starting to sound like a queen. I'm starting to sound like a Stark who learned her lesson. That night, Jon returned, covered in ash, bleeding, eyes wild. He walked straight into the council room and dropped something on the floor. A face, not a mask, not a carving, a real face, flayed and stretched, wearing the faded colors of House Tarly. I found the new Hand of the South, Jon said. He's building something in the tunnels. Old wildfire caches, forgotten dragon pits, dead men, whispers of black magic. Ned frowned. Black magic? Jon looked at him, dead in the eyes. They're trying to bring her back. No one spoke. Arya stepped forward. That's not possible. Jon's voice didn't change. It wasn't possible for you to come back either, Father. And in that moment, everyone in the room felt it. The South wasn't afraid. It was preparing for something far worse, not a war of swords, but a war of resurrection. The air inside the old dragon pit had changed. It no longer smelled of dust and forgotten bones. Now it pulsed, warm, damp, and unnatural, like something had begun to breathe beneath the stone. Jon Snow stood at its edge, torch flickering in his hand, staring down into the black. They're not bringing her back with prayers, he said. They're using old blood, witchcraft, sacrifice. Ned Stark watched his son in silence. His face had changed, more tired, more hollow. The boy who once begged for honor was now a man walking through nightmares. Who? Ned asked. Jon turned slowly. Red priests. What's left of them? A handful of Meisters cast out for heresy. And someone worse, Melisandre's apprentice. A girl with red eyes who speaks in Valyrian and shadows. Sansa paced behind them, eyes narrowing. This is madness. These are just rumors. Spells and shadows won't bring back the dead. Jon didn't blink. Then explain why I found her bones missing. Silence. Sansa stopped. Ned stepped forward, voice grim. You saw her burn. I saw her body. I didn't see it turn to ash. Arya leaned against the wall, arms crossed. You're saying someone took Daenerys's corpse? I'm saying, Jon said, voice tightening, someone is building a myth around it. That night, in the city's underbelly, a riot erupted in the Old Quarter. Not over food, not over soldiers, over faith. A new symbol had appeared, painted in blood on walls and doors, a flame rising from a silver crown. People gathered in candlelit rooms, chanting in strange tongues. Some whispered that Daenerys would return not as queen, but as fire itself, that she had only burned the city to make it pure, that the wolves who killed her had brought down not a tyrant, but a messiah. She will rise from the ashes, one woman screamed, as a mob dragged a northern soldier into the streets. She will ride the flame, and she will burn the wolves next. That soldier's body was found hanging by dawn, flayed, marked with the sigil of House Targaryen carved into his chest. And just like that, it had begun, not a war of banners, a war of belief. The North was no longer feared, it was hated. Hunted in shadows, cursed in corners. Every alley became a trap, every prayer a weapon. The people no longer cared about thrones or titles. They wanted a miracle, a burning one. In the council room, Ned pounded the table. We stay, we die. Sansa, calm and terrifying, shook her head. If we leave, we lose. We give them their martyr. We give her myth power. Arya slid a blade through her fingers. Then we find whoever's feeding the myth, and we kill it. But Jon stepped back from the table. I killed her, he said softly. And now the world wants her back more than it ever wanted her gone. Ned looked at his son. You did what had to be done. Jon's voice cracked. So did she. No one spoke. Not until a rider arrived from the east gate. He was missing an arm. Burned along his side. He dropped to his knees before Ned, choking on blood. They've opened the crypts, he gasped. Whose crypts? Ned asked. The man looked up, eyes wide with horror. The Targaryen crypts. In the dragon pit down in the old tunnels, someone was digging, not just for bones, but for legacy. That night, Arya slipped into the sewers alone. She wore no mask, no face, only silence. She moved like wind, listening to the chants echoing beneath the city. And then she saw it, a room, deep underground, lit by hundreds of candles. In the center, a stone altar. On it, something wrapped in silver cloth, pale, long, perfect Daenerys, or what was left of her. Her hair had been cleaned, her hands folded like a queen, and beside her lay a dragon egg, glowing faintly in the dark. Arya didn't breathe. She reached for her blade. Then the girl appeared. Red robes, eyes like blood and glass. She is the fire, the girl whispered. And you are the blade. Strike, and she returns in wrath. Spare her, and she returns in mercy. Arya froze. For the first time in a long time, she didn't know what to do, and behind her, the candles flickered, as if something had begun to breathe again. As if something had begun to breathe again. Arya Stark had killed gods, men, and monsters. But now, in the depths beneath King's Landing, blade in hand, she hesitated. Before her lay Daenerys Targaryen's corpse, too perfect, too preserved, as if death itself had been told to wait. Beside her, the glowing dragon egg pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, and the red-eyed girl, the priestess of shadow, stood like a statue watching with calm hunger. Strike her heart, the girl whispered, and the fire shall return with fury. Leave her untouched, and she returns in mercy. Arya stared at her blade. She had no trust left for magic, no love for gods. But something in the air shifted, the same kind of silence before a storm, the same chill before a man died screaming. She stepped back. I don't serve fire, Arya said coldly. I serve no one. And she vanished. Above, the city was shaking again. The people rioted not for food, not for war, but for prophecy. The cult of the flame-born queen had become more than a rumor. Now it was a religion. Sansa watched from the Red Keep as fire broke out in the West Quarter. A group of northern soldiers had been ambushed in a shrine. They were burned alive, with screams drowned out by chants. Ned paced like a man on the edge of a cliff. We've become the villains in their story, he said. We always were, Sansa replied. We just called it justice. In the streets, the chants echoed louder. She will rise. She will burn the liars. The fire remembers. And then came the final sign. The dragon egg, the one Jon had seen in the depths, was gone, vanished. No theft, no trail, no clue. But the next morning, people awoke to a streak of smoke across the sky. It wasn't fire. It wasn't ash. It was something alive. Jon Snow stood at the gates of the dragon pit. He had returned to the place where he killed her, and found no body, just the scent of sulphur, a crack in the stone where the altar had been, and a single white rose blooming in the rubble. He didn't speak when Arya arrived. She's gone, she said softly. Jon didn't answer. She was dead, Arya insisted. I saw her. That girl, the red-eyed one, she said it would happen, but I walked away. Maybe that was the spell, Jon said bitterly. Maybe your mercy brought her back. Arya shook her head. No, that thing that's out there. If it's her. She's not coming back with love. Jon turned to her. Then what? Arya's eyes were cold. Vengeance. In the north, snow began to fall again. In the south, fires refused to die, and in the ruins of Dragonstone, a shadow passed over the ancient castle. A creature, not quite a dragon, not quite a ghost, landed in silence. It carried a figure, a woman, naked, hair pale as moonlight, eyes closed, but breathing. When the wind touched her lips, they moved, and she whispered, Dracarys. Back in King's Landing, Ned Stark stood alone atop the Red Keep. His children had gone, Arya into the shadows, Jon into exile, Sansa into rule. But he had nowhere left to go. He looked out at the ruined city, and he remembered what Varys once told him. Power resides where men believe it resides. He had believed in justice, then vengeance, then nothing, and now power had changed faces again. It wore fire, it wore mercy, and it might soon wear the name Daenerys Targaryen once more. The game was never over. The wheel had not been broken. It had simply started turning again, this time slower, quieter, and far more dangerous, because now even the dead knew how to play.